Joining me now from Jerusalem is renowned London Times columnist and conservative thinker Melanie Phillips, who writes some of the sharpest and most insightful commentary on world affairs you'll find anywhere. In fact, you can read her exclusively on her brilliant blog, melaniephillips.substack.com, which I urge you to check out. Melanie, thanks for joining us on the eve of Joe Biden's inauguration. You wrote this week that the Democratic Party has a habit of empowering evil people, both domestically and internationally. Who did you have in mind in particular?
Well, thank you, Rowan. Nice to speak to you again. That blog post in particular was concerning Iran. President Obama empowered Iran through his catastrophic 2015 nuclear deal, which was supposed to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, but in fact specifically allows it to do so, or empowers it to do so, with only a delay of a few years, while funneling, by the relief of sanctions, funneling huge amounts of money into the regime so they could continue their appalling activities in regional power grab, subsidizing and provoking international terrorism, and continuing to advance their nuclear program surreptitiously. Now, my fear, and the fear of many people, particularly the government of Israel, is that the Biden administration is going to return to that policy. President Trump, as we know, in 2018, took America out of that deal, resumed punitive sanctions against Iran, crippled the regime, which has been waiting with eager anticipation, salivating at the prospect of the Biden administration, because it expects, as indeed many people, including myself, expect, that the Biden administration will basically return to the policy of the Obama years in re-empowering Iran. Now, to be up to date, the incoming Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has said there will be no speedy return to the 2015 deal. But it's not clear what that means, obviously. And the concern is that when I wrote the Democratic Party, like the rest of the left, empowers bad people at home and abroad, what I meant by that was that it always takes the path of least resistance when it comes to evil people, because it believes, either it believes in their cause, as in Black Lives Matter, in a racist, anti-white, anti-West, anti-Jew organization, which the Democrats choose to support because they are hitched to a perverse idea of anti-racism. But whether or not they agree with the agenda of bad people, they also have a habit, historically shown, of appeasing them, because they have this default belief on the left that the way forward is always through the application of reason. You always assume that the other guys are going to be motivated, just like you, by a concern for their short-term interest. And consequently, they are simply incapable of getting their heads around the fact that they have to deal, as in the case of the Iranian regime, with fanatics for whom those considerations simply don't apply, and for whom the concessions that Western liberals believe are essential to bring about a solution of any problem to the Middle East. In the Middle Eastern eyes and in Iranian eyes, any such concessions are a kind of white flag being waved, a sign of weakness in the enemy, which spurs them to redouble their efforts to wage war, to wage terrorism, to use blackmail, to take hostages, and all the rest of the tricks they have up their sleeve, in the confidence that the Biden administration, the Democrats, the left, will just cave in. And I'm afraid history proves them right.
Melanie, I love the fact that you point out about Biden's new team, who you describe as Obama retreads, basically, that they seem to think that they know more about the security of Israel than the Israelis. So there seems to be this arrogance.
Yes. Well, Mr. Blinken is on record as saying that when America came out of the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, it made Israel more vulnerable to attack than when America was in the deal. Now, the government of Israel takes absolutely the opposite point of view. We all watched, those of us who opposed that deal, we all watched after President Trump reimposed sanctions, we all watched as the Iranian regime became more and more under pressure. Now, that itself has dangers. Under pressure, and a regime like that lashes out. So it was not without danger. That's perfectly true. But nevertheless, the danger of a kind of dying serpent is very much less than the danger from a serpent whose teeth are newly sharpened.
Yes,
with
pallets full of gold. You write,
well, exactly.
You write in a great piece on conservatism that Judaism warns, "Put not your trust in princes." Who are the princes, Melanie?
Well, the princes are really our leaders. And what Judaism teaches is a lesson which was very well understood by the United Kingdom, as it happens, by Britain. And the lesson I was getting at in this particular case is the lesson of constitutional monarchy, that if you have a leader, a temporal leader, his power has to be constrained. And what Judaism set up in ancient Israel was a pattern of leadership in which you had a king who was constrained by the fact that there were alternative centers of power set up specifically to constrain him, particularly, say, the prophets. But he was constrained also by an understanding of the relationship that he had with the governed, in that it was not a relationship of power defined by power, the exercise of power. It was a relationship defined by what's called covenant. And covenant is an understanding which goes beyond temporal power, which is not governed by self-interest, which involves mutual obligations. And in the case of the ancient Israelite monarchy, it was a covenant between the king, the people, and God. And so the power of the leader was constrained. Now, the history of ancient Israel, unfortunately, is not a pleasant one. The kings became corrupt, the place fell apart, there was internal dissension and division which undermined the society from within. So it was not perfect by any means, but nevertheless, it was an inspiration to people in Western Europe. And ancient Britain set up its own constitutional monarchy with the Davidic dynasty in ancient Israel very much in mind. And that has endured. And what I was saying in that particular blog post was that when America had its revolution, which sundered it from the British crown, and it became an independent nation, it sundered itself from its own, as it were, cultural history. It very much drew a line behind itself and decided to owe its allegiance, or the allegiance of its citizens. Instead of allegiance to the crown, they would pledge their allegiance to a set of laws, abstract principles enshrined in the Constitution of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what I've said in that blog post is that however noble those things are, and America has indeed been the great champion of liberty in the world to the great benefit of all of us, but unfortunately, liberty does not bind people together. What binds people together in a society is a kind of common understanding that you all share an allegiance to something which binds you, which is everlasting, which goes back into antiquity, which is based on your history, your institutions, your traditions. And America sundered itself from that. Instead, it pledged a legal allegiance to basically a creed of individualism. And consequently, it has been unable, and conservatives in America have been unable to conserve what is most precious to that society, which is not liberty. Liberty is the result of what is most precious, which is unity in support of basic principles. Melanie, and unfortunately, that has been undermined.